This is a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online, the online resource for all construction professionals that's available 24/7. Please don't forget to subscribe at the place you usually get your podcasts so as not to miss a thing from the second series, as well of course as visiting our YouTube channel. Hello again and welcome to another podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. As usual, Barney, my red Labrador, is here to offer his advice and to keep an eye on proceedings. And by the way, Barney and I would really appreciate it if you'd like to write a review. Now, if you're new to Duncan Cartlidge Online podcasts, welcome. Please don't forget to subscribe, as well as catching up with previous episodes. If you're already a subscriber, thank you for your support. In this episode, we'll cover a variety of topics including the Private Finance Initiative gamble, and ask the question, is the RICS out of control? So, let's kick off with the return of the Private Finance Initiative, or PFI. Does the government have any other choice? In a blog post on Duncan Cartlidge Online back in September last year, I suggested that the Private Finance Initiative could be making a comeback. Speculation was such that some newspapers in Scotland, where the PFI was particularly hated, had already got their retaliation in by running stories highlighting some of the previous PFI projects under the headline Biggest PFI Disasters. At this point, I have to admit that I am an advocate of the PFI. Okay, perhaps there were one or two cases of dodgy refinance deals, but on the whole, the model delivered modern, up-to-date infrastructure at a time when many hospitals, prisons and schools that were built in the Victorian era were crumbling, and the coffers were empty. The PFI model was introduced on the back of the Tory party's dash for privatisation in the 1980s, and was enthusiastically embraced by the Labour government in the 1990s and 2000s. You see, the attraction for politicians was that the funding didn't show up as a debt, although I understand the rules have since been changed. In 2018, an analysis of the costs and benefits of PFI by the National Audit Office found that PFI projects were more likely to be delivered on time and to budget, albeit the service costs were often higher. It was shown that the PFI has a very good track record in the development and construction phases of the project. However, the operational phase has been problematic. Rightly or wrongly, the assumption behind the introduction of PFI was that the private sector is better at managing risk and delivering large-scale projects to time and to cost. As a concept, you either loved or hated the PFI, a procurement model where the private sector formed a consortium that designed, financed and operated infrastructure projects such as schools, hospitals and prisons for a 20 to 25 year period in return for an annual unitary charge. At the end of the deal, the school, hospital, etc. is handed back to the public sector in a good state of repair. Currently, and over the next few years, many of the Private Finance Initiative deals struck in the 1990s are coming to an end, which itself is causing a problem. As, for example, much of the public sector's facilities management expertise was transferred to the PFI consortia when PFI was the only game in town. In fact, there was a time when new infrastructure work would not get approval unless they were PFI procured. With the unitary charges from the period of the PFI boom in the early 2000s forecast to last until 2050. In 2018, after much criticism, particularly from trades unions and in the healthcare sector from the British Medical Association, the PFI was finally buried as a public sector procurement option, following the collapse of Carillion. Or was it? Well, just when you thought it was safe to come from under the duvet, could a form of PFI be going to make a comeback? In her statement in July 2024, the Chancellor announced that she is planning to bring in, and I quote, a very large number of private equity fund operators. Surely they wouldn't dare, would they? Bear in mind the country's finances last July, when Labour had just won a landslide election victory, looked a lot rosier than they do today. So does the government have any other choice than to resurrect a form of PFI and to use private sector finance, always criticised for being more expensive than public sector finance, for their infrastructure plans, on which so much depends? One of the reasons being widely suggested for the readoption of a PFI model is that the unitary charges, which will be paid out of capital, would not kick in until 2028 at the earliest. Who said 3 years is a long time in politics? Criticisms of the classic PFI model was a mixture of refinancing deals resulting in large profits for the private sector, with the public sector receiving little or no benefit, high unitary charges, that's the annual charges paid by the user of the PFI facility, expensive facilities management, claims of hundreds of pounds being charged for routine maintenance, such as changing a light bulb, uninspiring design, projects that were designed for ease of maintenance and not architectural merit. The new Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh is an example of pragmatic cost-in-use design. And finally, less advantageous working conditions for staff transferred from the public sector to the PFI facility. We should know a lot more when the government's 10-year infrastructure strategy, timetable for June, is published, setting out its approach to private investment. In the meantime, an advisory group, the British Infrastructure Task Force, is examining lessons from the previous version of PFI. One thing is for sure, it will have to be rebranded under a new name. Before we get on to the problems of the RICS, and on a more serious note, 2 people lose their lives to suicide every working day within the construction industry, and construction workers are 4 times more likely to experience mental health issues than the general population. The industry is especially vulnerable due to factors like long hours, working away from home, self-employment, and high-pressure working environments. Now, Mindflow has been founded by Causeway Technologies and is a charity championing mental health in the construction industry using the power of football. It is hoped to foster a culture in the construction industry where mental health is openly discussed, understood, and prioritised. The Talk Football, Talk Mental Health programme will see current and ex-football players visit construction sites to deliver mental health awareness. And now, on to the RICS. Is the RICS out of control? Justin Young, Chief Executive, and Martin Samworth, the Chairman of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, recently gave a bizarre interview to the Times newspaper at MIPIM. That's the annual jolly for those who have the time and the money to travel to Cannes in the south of France. Bearing in mind we are still waiting to hear the outcome of the RICS's proposal to make pathways into the institution more accessible, these 2 guardians of the RICS think that the RICS should be aiming to double its membership. Apparently, this can be achieved by appealing to more people working in property beyond quantity surveyors and estate agents. Incidentally, there was no mention of building surveyors. The last time the RICS went for growth was under the stewardship of Sean Tompkins. Enough of that. According to Samworth, the world is now full, and I quote, of sustainable people. It's full of data scientists. It's full of prop tech. Apparently that's short for property technology specialists. It's full of a whole bunch of people that the RICS should accommodate as members. He went on, we, that's the RICS, have to find different pathways to enable them to become members. It gets worse. In the article, the chairman goes on to say that the property industry is dominated by middle-class ex-public school boys and is famous for its lack of diversity. I think that Samworth is not only wrong, but is also confusing property with construction, and is talking a load of nonsense that reflects his background. It does not match the industry that I have worked in for many years. Apparently, this middle-class domination is such a major problem that the RICS is working to change that too by developing different methods for getting into the profession. Young continues, if you can't afford to go to university, that shouldn't stop you from becoming a chartered surveyor. You just need to do it in a different way. It also seems as though Samworth is clueless about training and education, stating that the RICS surveyors are so special because they have spent 2 years plus learning to get into the profession. And then there's the annual training members have to do as well. I don't know about you, but 2 years sounds like a good deal to me. Samworth goes on, this rigorous training means RICS surveyors know absolutely what to do and what the latest industry standards are. Of course, all of this is very unfortunate timing, as the president of the RICS, Justin Sullivan, is currently under investigation, albeit by the RICS, for convening advice given by way of an RICS mandatory, note mandatory, professional statement to its members when acting as an expert witness. You couldn't make it up. The pair are also trying to grow the RICS outside of the UK, where there are apparently some 40,000 RICS members in 40-odd countries. The deadly duo is big on devolution, letting local leaders determine how RICS standards and training is best delivered to members in their country. Is this really feasible? It is only comparatively recently that the construction industry, ranked as one, if not the most corrupt sector worldwide, has started to take ethical behaviour seriously, as demonstrated by the RICS APC. Does this mean that ethical standards, for example, will reflect local customs and business standards? As somebody who has lectured on ethics and ethical standards within the construction industry, I have always been highly critical of a well-known UK professional body, no name, no pactual, whose rules of conduct state, when working in a country other than its own, conduct its business in accordance with this code, so far as it is applicable to the customs and practices of that country. Now, this seems to cut right across the code of conduct for the RICS members, which currently insists that RICS members working abroad should adopt and work to the same ethical standards as if they were in the UK. Regarding world domination, Samworth goes on to say, the way people look at the RICS in France is, for example, totally different to how it is in the UK or Asia. As somebody who has worked in Paris as a quantity surveyor, I can say the French aren't at all interested in the RICS. They have their own well-established trade bodies for property professionals, like UNTEC. The attitude goes back to 1992 and entry to the single market, when we were told that Europe couldn't wait to engage with the UK construction industry and use its professions. Just ask anybody who has tried to break into the European closed shops to see how welcome they have been made. The RICS membership is clearly disenchanted with the way the institution is being run. In the 2024 Governing Council elections, despite record applications, voter turnout was only 6.53%, reflecting disengagement amongst the members. The RICS has acknowledged the need for discussion on member involvement in leadership elections, but has not yet committed to reform. Instead of pursuing an agenda of world domination, perhaps it would be better if the RICS began to make the institution more relevant to its members, because, let's face it, the main reason people renew their eye-watering annual subscription is to enhance or maintain their job prospects. At least one prominent RICS member is trying to put pressure on the RICS to change. A recent poll on LinkedIn showed that more than 90% of RICS members who voted wanted greater membership participation in decisions and appointments. There has to be an end to the RICS marking its own homework. And finally, Bob the Builder to the rescue. The short-term outlook for the construction industry looks very fragile. Tender price inflation in the first quarter of 2025 has increased to 3.5%, with the full effect of the new national insurance increases yet to kick in. Increased labour costs and uncertain global markets has resulted in delayed decisions for many orders. So how is UK PLC going to weather the storm? Well folks, it looks as though growing the economy is down to us. So roll up your sleeves. The Office of Budget Responsibility has produced figures claiming that 305,000 homes will be built, with 1.3 million homes being delivered by the end of the Parliament. In addition, the OBR is predicting that changes to the planning system will boost the economy by £6.8 billion. Well, that's all for this episode, folks. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you for listening to the end. This has been a podcast from Duncan Cartlidge Online. Barney, who incidentally is loving this warm weather, and I would really appreciate it if you could spread the word, subscribe, and if you have time, leave a review. Until next time, take care.